The raindrops drummed loudly on the roof of the car. There was a guy named Lin Mo sitting in the car and talking to someone. His interlocutor was a girl who complained that the boyfriend's father no longer wanted to be with her. After this phrase, the girl took out a syringe and told the guy that there was no point in him staying here anymore either. Lin Mo opened his eyes wide with surprise as he looked at the syringe, and the girl suggested he leave with her. After which, she grabbed Lin Mo's hand and gave him an injection. The contents of the syringe began to slowly spread through the guy's veins. His consciousness began to fade and his eyes began to close on their own. Soon Lin Mo stopped even hearing the rumble of raindrops on the car. His eyes closed and his breathing became even and quiet. He finally fell asleep, still lying on the car seat with his seatbelt on. Suddenly, some guy started drumming on the car window, urging Lin Mo to wake up. However, Lin Mo did not react to his words in any way, driving the kid to despair. Because he could hear the train coming. The kid was watching the train go by with all his eyes. Because the train was gaining speed faster and faster and was driving straight towards the car where Lin Mo was. A while later at the Lin family home, next to Lin Mo was his brother and father, who was walking ahead of the boys and reprimanding them so that Lin Mo wouldn't dare to go where he shouldn't. The younger brother, listening to this, was very upset and even wondered why it was necessary to save him at all. The boy felt that his family didn't need a freak like him. The kid couldn't even stand it, and hurt tears treacherously rolled from his eyes, dripping to the ground. The older brother named Ying Jun paid attention to the younger brother's condition, then stroked the man's head. Ying Jun leaned over to his younger brother and promised him that he would always be by his side. And a few years later, just as the sakura bloomed, the younger brother graduated. At this significant moment for him, his older brother was of course by his side. Therefore, Lin Mo decided to give his second shirt button to the person close to him, according to the old tradition. Ying Jun looked at what his younger brother presented to him with interest. After all, Lin Mo had put the clasp from his jacket into his palm because he didn't have anything else. Ying Jun laughed and remarked that his brother had already grown up and learned how to make good gifts. Lin Mo swiped his hand across his face, embarrassed by his action, and the older brother clenched his hand with the gift into a fist and promised to keep it safe, after which his facial expression suddenly became sad. He looked away from his brother's eyes and apologized. This was how Lin Mo found out that his brother's girlfriend would have to come over today, and therefore he wouldn't be able to celebrate graduation with him. And then Ying Jun himself didn't realize how it was that he ended up lying on the bed. And leaning over him, holding his hands above his head, was Lin Mo, who whispered something to him excitedly and quietly. Listening closely, Ying Jun realized that he had decided to confess his feelings to him. Afterward, the younger brother leaned over and kissed him. Ying Jun didn't resist or reject his brother. He agreed to let Lin Mo do whatever he wanted with him. The streets of the city were habitually buzzing with the hum of passing cars. Lin Mo was going about his business lost in the crowd. Suddenly, his gaze snatched one man out of the stream of people. Lin Mo looked at the man's blonde-haired, so seemingly familiar back of his head. He was sure that it was his older brother, Ying Jun. From surprise, the boy froze. Then he looked more closely at the stranger. When the one turned to face him in profile, Lin Mo realized that it wasn't his brother. He had mistaken his name. Lin Mo wanted to be upset, but quickly restrained himself because Ying Jun had absolutely nothing to do in this area. The boy continued on his way, bitterly regretting that he could never forget his older brother. With his side vision, Lin Mo noticed a girl beside him. And in the next instant, the girl suddenly stumbled and began to fall to the ground. Lin Mo quickly oriented himself and picked up the stranger in his arms. She looked him straight in the eye with surprise. Lin Mo calmly endured her gaze without averting his eyes. And the next instant, the girl suddenly lashed out violently and pushed him away. This stranger's behavior was very surprising to Lin Mo. He stood there and stared at the fleeing girl in amazement. Meanwhile, the stranger ran away, covering her face with her hands in shame. Never before had she been assisted by such a handsome fellow. She was so absorbed in her misery that she noticed too late that she was running into a red traffic light. The girl looked up at the road in horror, and a car was already flying at her and smashed into the young girl with force, throwing her somewhere far away from herself. 1. The people who were around watched this incident with horror. Lin Mo also witnessed this terrible accident. What's more, the girl was thrown right back at his feet. Suddenly, the stranger turned to the lad, Wood, and with difficulty moving her lips, asked him for help. Lin Mo leaned over and held out his hands to her. The girl drenched with hope that he had agreed to help her, but Lin Mo only splutteringly shook off his pants, angry that she had stained them with her blood. And then he just picked up and stepped over the stranger like some kind of thing. He was walking and feeling very annoyed with the situation. And the girl remained lying there wounded. Lin Mo didn't care about her. A handsome policeman was standing not far from the scene of the accident, and girls were hovering around him, asking him for his phone number. The policeman smiled and refused, citing that police officers are not supposed to give out their personal information. Then he looked at his notebook and said goodbye to the girls and asked them if anyone remembered anything to come with their statements directly to him at the police station. The witnesses realized that he was going to leave, and it made them very upset. This is when one of the girls drew the police officer's attention to the guy she had previously described as having rudely pushed the injured girl away from him. The policeman looked with interest to where the girl was pointing. His eyes narrowed, as if he wanted to get a better look at the stranger. The cop even apologized to the girls and headed straight for the guy. When he caught up with the man, he touched him on the shoulder, drawing his attention to him. The stranger turned around and looked at the policeman. The policeman was surprised and called him by his first name with a smile, Lin Mo. Lin Mo looked at the policeman confusedly. Then he turned away and sighed heavily. The policeman suddenly ruffled his hair with a smile, as if they had known each other for a long time. Lin Mo felt uncomfortable, for he didn't want to give away that he recognized the policeman. That's why he pushed the guy's hands away from you. And then he pretended he didn't realize who he was. The policeman looked at him with undisguised surprise, showing with his whole appearance that he absolutely could not believe that Lin Mo did not recognize him. Lin Mo sat at a table in the room near the window, wrapping his arms around his head. The boy was in utter despair, for he had acted very foolishly with his brother when he pretended not to recognize the one. He wanted to not just cover himself with his hands, but literally disappear. Lin Mo ran his hand through his hair and ruffled it. He realized that he didn't believe that Ying Jun believed that his younger brother might not know. After all, he really couldn't forget his older brother in any way. Lin Mo recalled in great detail their recent conversation and how he had tried to pretend not to know his brother. And Ying Jun only looked at him and wondered at his pretense, while Lin Mo carefully averted his gaze, trying to play his role convincingly. And then, as if coming to his senses, his older brother roughly grabbed him by his jacket. Pulling him to himself, his brother angrily shouted directly into Lin Mo's face that he probably shouldn't have remembered him too often during the separation. Ying Jun didn't let Lin Mo's jacket out of his hands and dragged him behind him to the station, as he wanted to find out why he had fled from the accident scene. Lin Mo was surprised at his brother's boldness like this and practically didn't resist. Though he tried to make excuses along the way, his brother didn't want to listen to him at all. Then the younger brother called the older brother by name in desperation, stroking the back of his head, and complained that he had a professor waiting for him who needed to give him a report on an experiment he was conducting. Ying Jun turned around and caustically noted the fact that his brother had remembered him after all. Lin Mo once again grabbed his head from the realization of the stupidity of his own actions. He was ashamed in front of his brother for being so utterly foolish with him then when they met. However, the guy realized that it was most likely because he still liked his brother even after 5 years. He remembered very vividly their interactions in their youth, and the way he gave his brother his jacket clasp as a keepsake on graduation day. Lin Mo continued to sit still in the same room and await his brother's arrival. Finally, the door opened and Ying Jun entered the room. He held a folder with Lin Mo's biography in his hands and rebuked his brother for deceiving him, for he had given him incorrect statements about his activities. Lin Mo had to reluctantly agree with him. At that time, Ying Jun decided that apparently his brother would continue to cheat him, and he really didn't like it. So he bent over the table to him and started berating his brother for disappearing for a few more years while locking his phone. Lin Mo was not sure referring to the fact that he had lost his cell phone. But the older brother was not impressed. He squinted his eyes and continued to look down on his brother. Yi continued his attempts to get some truth out of him, but Lin Mo wasn't going to answer his questions. Ying Jun then jumped up from his chair and called him a swear word with anger. Lin Mo only turned away at this and didn't reply anything, and his older brother suddenly stroked his head. This surprised the guy, who looked up at him in surprise. Ying Jun was now standing right in front of his younger brother and assured him that he had no grudge against him, even though he remained just as stubborn. Lin Mo smiled then and noticed with pleasure that his elder brother hadn't changed and remained just as kind. Suddenly, the door to the room opened with a bang, and their brother's co-workers piled in. They embarrassedly stood up, pretending they were passing by here by chance. One of the co-workers had a picture of Lin Mo in his hand. This displeased Ying Jun very much, and he took away the man's photo. noting with annoyance that they shouldn't have scared his little brother, much less stood eavesdropping under the door. However, it seemed that no one could hear him because everyone was already crowded around Lin Mo, saying something to him enthusiastically. And one of Ying Jun's colleagues even suggested throwing a party to celebrate the brothers' reunion after all these years. Ying Jun was skeptical of the proposal, but his colleague began to urge him to send them to the club together. But Ying Jun even grabbed his head at such news because then they would have to take the subway there, and his younger brother was very afraid of him. Lin Mo, hearing such news, was very surprised. Afterward, the boy assured his brother that he had gotten rid of his fear and he was not afraid to ride the subway now. The elevator car announced with a soft squeak that it had stopped at the first floor, and the whole company, along with the brothers, got out of the cabin. Unexpectedly, Lin Mo turned to his brother, explaining to the latter that he wanted to visit the restroom. Ying Jun had nothing against it and promised something to his brother at the entrance left. At this, the guy called out to the other guys, advising them not to wait for him and his younger brother because they would come up later. Left alone, Ying Jun took out his cigarettes and lighter, after which he lit the tip of his cigarette and took a drag. Looking at the flame of the lighter in his hands, he thought that he was still wondering why his brother had disappeared from his life so quickly a few years ago. Ying Jun suddenly remembered all those moments that Lin Mo had experienced at a rather young age. For it was then that he rescued his brother from the car when the car was crushed under the wheels of a train along with their mother. Ying Jun, taking another puff, remembered that this was why Lin Mo couldn't stand any trains. And the guy was also scrolling through their recent conversation and even grabbed his head when he realized that he hadn't acted quite right to his brother. Then he leaned against the door near where he stood, absent-mindedly twirling his cigarette in his teeth, and decided not to pester his brother with any more inconvenient questions. Ying Jun was so thoughtful that he didn't even notice Lin Mo quietly walking up to him and taking the cigarette out of his mouth. The guy came so close that Ying Jun involuntarily flinched in surprise, and Lin Mo reprimanded his brother about smoking and took away the cigarette. And after the guy threw it in the trash, although Ying Jun tried to justify that he had picked up the habit just out of boredom. After dealing with the cigarettes, the brothers went down to the subway. Soon they heard a train approaching. A few seconds later, a train pulled up and stopped right in front of them. The doors of the carriage swung open and Lin Mo and Ying Jun entered it. But when Lin Mo stepped over the threshold of the carriage, Ying Jun decided to support him. The older brother grabbed the younger brother's hand tightly, and when Lin Mo gave him a surprised look, he offered to call a cab. But Mo only grinned and intertwined their fingers, suggesting that his older brother just hold hands since he was so worried about him. In fact, they always did when the younger brother was afraid of something as a child. However, Ying Jun felt somewhat awkward about this situation. He realized that they probably looked a little racy from the outside as they stood and held hands on the subway. And indeed, some people were paying attention to them, causing Ying Jun to even blush slightly. And then Lin Mo also got too close to him. Ying Jun turned to his brother, trying to figure out what he wanted. And Lin Mo complained of a headache and rested his head on his brother's shoulder. And then he squeezed his hand very tightly, and leaning his head even more firmly on his shoulder, asked him to let him stand like that for a while. Ying Jun looked at their reflection in the glass of the carriage door and realized that his younger brother's demeanor had changed somewhat. It was as if he was unlike himself, but as fate would have it, and soon they were on their way to the club where the party was being held. The fun was in full swing and hot drinks were pouring out in rivers. Some of the co-workers were acting a bit swaggering, but they didn't seem to care at all, even though some of them didn't like it very much. In the meantime, Ying Jun had already had a decent amount to drink and began to be frank with his brother. He reassured him that if he had a problem, he shouldn't disappear, but should just talk to him first. Lin Mo looked at him silently, even with some bewilderment. And then he spread his hands because he realized that his brother was just already very drunk. The younger brother even tried to take away Ying Jun's glass, rightly deciding that the latter had had enough alcohol for the day. But Ying Jun unexpectedly took his suggestion in stride, saying that he wasn't that drunk. And then he started to chortle, noting that he shouldn't underestimate him, but he couldn't finish his sentence as his face grimaced unpleasantly. And then he covered his mouth with his hand, clearly feeling an attack of nausea. Lin Mo looked at his brother anxiously, but he had already rushed away, leaving Lin Mo standing there and looking at him in confusion. Lin Mo opened the door to the restroom with a slight click. Afterward, he timidly looked inside, hoping to find his brother there. But to his amazement, the boy found no one there. The room was empty. After a few seconds, however, he heard some noise in one of the stalls. Without a moment's thought, Lin Mo abruptly swung open the door to the stall. And what he saw shocked him. Ying Jun was standing and passionately kissing some girl. Lin Mo stood and stared at this scene, unable to utter anything. It was hard to tell from his face if he was jealous or just surprised by what he saw. However, rather quickly, Lin Mo was spotted by the couple. The boy clenched his fingers into a fist with anger. And then he turned around and walked out of the booth. At this time, he heard behind him the girl complaining to her brother about him ruining all their fun. Lin Mo, meanwhile, walked to the door to the restroom. And without a second thought, I locked it up. The guy had something on his mind. He wasn't going to leave the scene he'd seen for nothing. Meanwhile, the girl continued her caresses in the restroom stall. But Ying Jun was already quite sluggish in responding to her pestering. And then the girl felt her hair being grabbed. She opened her eyes in surprise, trying to figure out what was going on. She then squealed in pain and let go of Ying Jun from her embrace. Naturally, it was Lin Mo who grabbed the girl by the hair and was not surprised in the least when he saw that the girl was wearing a wig, and it wasn't a girl at all, but a guy. Pushing the transvestite away, Lin Mo hurriedly caught his brother in a hug as he was not on his feet at all. The rejected guy tried to be indignant behind Lin Mo's back, but the latter paid no attention to him. He was completely preoccupied with his older brother. And then he did turn his attention to the transvestite and became outraged that he was trying to harass a drunk man. The one only brushed it off, believing that he hadn't done anything outrageous, and folded his arms on his chest while Lin Mo tried to help his brother who was feeling ill. But Lin Mo didn't reply anything as he was busy helping his brother. But the transvestite did not relent and said that Ying Jun was the first to take the initiative. He only gave in to him. Lin Mo finally got tired of listening to this nonsense and drove the guy right into his nose. The one cried out in sharp pain, tried to intercept his arm, and Lin Mo continued to press the guy, even though the guy didn't understand what right he had to come at him in the first place. And Lin Mo suddenly moved closer to his ear and declared that he would break all his bones if he ever saw him near his brother again. This statement pretty much scared the guy. He thought he was dealing with a crazy person. The transvestite looked at Lin Mo carefully, and he truly felt scared for his life. The boy tried with even greater zeal to get his hands away from his face, but it was all to no avail. Then he made a greater effort, realizing that his life was in danger. Finally, the guy managed to break free from Lin Mo's grip. Then he rushed straight to the nightstand where the vase stood. Quickly grabbing the vase, he turned back to his assailant, and then threw it straight at Lin Mo. And before he could recover from his surprise, the boy made his escape. He ran to the door leading to the hallway of the club. But as soon as the boy touched the doorknob, disappointment awaited him. Turns out the door was locked. He started trying to open the door, but all his attempts failed. It ended up just breaking off the handle. The transvestite stared at the doorknob in his hands for a while, arriving in mild shock. And then he started pounding on the door, crying for help. At the same time, he felt Lin Mo walking up to him from behind. He turned around in horror. Lin Mo was indeed quite close by with a smile, inquiring where he was in such a hurry. The guy threw his hands up, warning Lin Mo not to approach him. Droplets of sweat appeared on his forehead from the exertion, and Lin Mo stood and deliberately slowly polished the shard in his hands with the very handkerchief he used to wipe the blood on his face from being hit by the vase. He looked calmly into the boy's eyes, as if contemplating where he should begin his reprisal on him, and then as if deciding something, walked even closer to him. His victim froze, afraid to move. Apparently he felt that Lin Mo would not let him go and accepted it. And Lin Mo came even closer and pointed at him with the tip of the shard from the broken vase. The transvestite opened his eyes in horror, looking at his executioner. And then he screamed with all his might, calling for help. But no one heard him, and only water dripped noisily from the faucet into the sink. After a while, that very water overflowed over the edge of the sink. Lin Mo and Ying Jun walked out of the room squelching through this very water. The younger brother hugged the older brother and asked how he was feeling. Ying Jun was clearly feeling contentedly defeated, and then suddenly pulled out of his arms, clearly intending to keep the party going. After all, he's long since grown up and can do what he wants. Lin Mo looked at him with some disbelief. Then he caught Ying Jun in his arms again, as the guy really couldn't stand on his feet well. Sighing, he gave him a pat on the head, and they continued on their way. Soon, Lin Mo had already practically dragged his brother to his destination. And in the meantime, someone came to the door leading to the restroom stalls. A pool of blood was visible from under the door. They were Ying Jun's co-workers who were cheerfully discussing how they were spending their time. When they opened the door, they didn't notice anything at first, as they were engrossed in conversation. But then they saw something that really surprised them. On the floor, leaning against the wall, sat the corpse of a man. It was the same transvestite who had previously spent time with Ying Jun. A lantern brightly illuminated the street. Lin Mo and Ying Jun had almost reached home as Big Brother felt sick again. When he felt a little better, he thanked his brother for his support. Afterward, unable to stay on his feet again, I collapsed into his arms. Lin Mo carefully hugged Ying Jun, hoping that he felt a little better. Ying Jun pulled away from his younger brother and looked into his eyes. And his gaze was very intense. Lin Mo also looked his brother in the eyes in response, not quite understanding what he wanted from him. And the reason his brother was staring at him so intently was quite simple. Ying Jun, with his alcohol-fogged brain, saw his brother as that transvestite from the club who was in the form of a girl. And he thought this image was quite beautiful. Lin Mo did indeed have the same blue eyes as that guy, but such a revelation from his brother was unexpected to him. Meanwhile, Ying Jun started touching it while continuing to see something that wasn't really there. Lin Mo tried to explain to his brother about settling down, but the latter wasn't going to listen to him. The younger brother was beginning to get annoyed with his older brother's behavior. This was not how he had imagined their meeting after a long separation. And Ying Jun, although he was drunk, he seemed to be really happy to see his little brother again. That's probably why he was so flattered and cuddled up to him. And when the older brother let out a tear, complaining about how he was always looking everywhere with his eyes for the younger one, and he was looking everywhere with his eyes, there was no doubt about it. Lin Mo stood rolling his eyes and patiently listening to this drunken monologue. And Ying Jun had already buried his face in his chest, crying to his heart's content. While continuing to complain about how much he missed him and worried about him, Lin Mo tried to pull his brother away from him and shift his attention, which he quite succeeded because Ying Jun stopped crying and paid attention to his brother's attempts to reach him. And Lin Mo pushed his brother away from him, complaining about the foul odor coming from him. At first, Ying Jun looked at him with a puzzled look, and then realizing what he meant, took great offense. Just at that moment, people passed by them and noticed the scene going on under the streetlight. Lin Mo immediately rushed to hug his brother to calm him down, and then he admitted his guilt and apologized for the careless statement. Ying Jun looked at Lin Mo again with a cloudy gaze. Then he grinned stupidly, marveling again at his brother's beautiful blue eyes. Lin Mo realized that he was seeing that transvestite from the club in him again, and in the next instant, Ying Jun suddenly pulled him towards him with force. Lin Mo only had time to open his eyes in surprise, as in a second, Ying Jun was already prying at him with kisses. But instead of giving in, Lin Mo resented this behavior and pushed his older brother away. In his defense, Ying Jun admitted that he had rarely ever met a person he truly liked. That was why he had decided to kiss him. Lin Mo directly clarified if his brother was aware of what he was doing and understood the consequences of it. Ying Jun only wanted to open his mouth and say something, as already the younger brother was the first to pounce on him with kisses. Ying Jun seemed no less surprised now than Lin Mo a few minutes ago, but he didn't resist. Instead, he hugged Lin Mo Ya to respond to his kiss. And at that moment, it seemed to them that there was nothing and no one around but the starry sky above them. It was morning outside the window and the breeze swayed the curtains lightly. Ying Jun lay sleeping on the bed, and a ray of sunlight fell on his face. The boy's eyelashes twitched, shielding his eyes from the bright light. And then he slowly opened his eyes, awakened by a ray of sunlight, and immediately grabbed his head because it was cracking after yesterday's unmercifully, and he was also annoyed by the wind that blew from the open window. Ying Jun decided that he had just forgotten to close the window last night when he got home. But finally opening his eyes, he was very surprised. Because the room where he was lying had a window all the way to the floor, and he didn't have windows like that in his house. Ying Jun grabbed his head and tried to remember what had happened to him yesterday. But he could only remember that Lin Mo was with him, and the rest was like a blur. Suddenly he remembered spending time with some girl, and the thought made him grab his head. Ying Jun was afraid that they had spent the night together, and after all, if his younger brother found out, he would be setting a bad example for him with his casual liaisons. Here the guy turned to the surroundings around him and was pretty impressed with what he saw. Aside from the floor-to-ceiling windows, the furnishings around here were quite expensive, and he figured some rich lady lived here. Ying Jun even thought that he had gotten involved with some girl from an oligarch family. Finally, he guessed to see who was lying next to him, and when he realized who he was in bed with, he was completely shocked. Next to Ying Jun lay I was sleeping peacefully his younger brother Lin Mo. The boy clutched his head for the umpteenth time that morning, trying to remember what had happened last night after all. Images of the evening began to flash through his mind, and he distinctly remembered the many bottles on the table. how he socialized with co-workers and made toasts, how haphazardly he drank a lot of alcohol, and how a certain brunette at the table was giving him languorous glances. Ying Jun decided not to miss his chance and approached her. The guy immediately started to flip with the girl, and it seems that she didn't mind it at all. And the girl only smiled and looked at him languidly, and then offered to go to his house and show him something. Naturally, Ying Jun was in such a state that he didn't mind. However, after a while, they ended up in the restroom. Ying Jun himself didn't remember how it happened. And at this time, Lin Mo was walking behind them, which some girls were trying to stop. They offered him a lot of fun and openly flirted with him, but the guy did not give in to their entreaties. Just then, Ying Jun noticed this, squinting his eyes in his brother's direction. He apologized to his companion and rose from his seat. The guy went straight to his brother. As he approached him and the girls, he began to shoo them away from bothering his brother. Ying Jun then hugged his brother's shoulders in a friendly manner, as if showing everyone whose he was. He then turned to Lin Mo, pretending to be worried about his honor and dignity. At one point, they were too close to each other. Lin Mo looked at him as if with condemnation. And then they moved outside. Ying Jun was still sort of trying to subconsciously appeal to his brother's conscience, but he had already completely lost his sense of reality. Lin Mo nestled against his older brother's lips, and Ying Jun, although surprised, did not push his brother away. I just took his kiss and returned it. And now Ying Jun was sitting in his brother's bed and remembering that very kiss. This memory made him horrified, for the lad had quite allowed for the moment that he had slept with his own brother that night. Though truth be told, he had absolutely no recollection of what he'd done last night while in someone else's bed. And at the same time, he had this feeling that below his belly he was now somewhat out of sorts. This last revelation excited Ying Jun beyond belief. With his heart beating hard, the boy decided to test his hunch and lifted his blanket. Luckily, his assumption was not confirmed, and he was wearing underwear. This discovery calmed the guy down a bit, but he was still very nervous. Ying Jun was ready to directly burn with shame. Biting his lip, he suddenly remembered something. The boy remembered how his younger brother had been beside him in bed that night. Ying Jun almost wailed in his voice from his unwillingness to believe what was happening. Along with that, however, he realized that although he was not an overly decent man, he was hardly the one who had gone to the trouble of sleeping with his own brother. After realizing this simple thing, Ying Jun decided to check what his brother was sleeping in. Lin Mo seemed to have been asleep all this time without hearing anything. Ying Jun then dared to test his hunch and reached out to him. He began slowly betting the blanket off his brother. At the same time, Ying Jun himself was not feeling his best and swallowed convulsively. The lower he lowered the blanket, the more amazed he became, because he saw how many hickeys there were on his brother's body. Well, since that wasn't the only thing he wanted to see, he continued to pull the blanket off Lin Mo. Then, quite unexpectedly, his younger brother grabbed his arm. With this action, he scared Ying Jun incredibly, and Lin Mo opened his eyes and innocently noted that Ying Jun had already woken up. They sat in the bed together, and Ying Jun felt extremely awkward and tried to explain some logical justification for his action. Therefore, nothing more clever came to Ying Jun's mind than to cite worrying about his brother's health. After all, he was unclothed. At this ridiculous excuse, Lin Mo remarked that if he was worried about his health, why did he pull the blanket off him? Ying Jun couldn't find anything to reply to this and seemed to want to disappear from this place as soon as possible. And Lin Mo suddenly smiled, then placed his hand very close to his brother's naked body and whispered in his ear, wondering if he was trying to find proof that they'd spent the night together. Hearing this, Ying Jun blushed to the roots of his hair and looked at his younger brother with embarrassment. The room was so quiet you could hear the birds chirping outside the window. Ying Jun came to his senses and zealously began to resent that Lin Mo was completely wrong in his assumptions. The guy was trying to prove that he would never allow himself to do any naughty things to his little brother. At this, Lin Mo only chuckled, noticing that last night, Big Brother had a slightly different opinion. Ying Jun almost fainted from such a statement and blushed again. He continued to stare at Lin Mo with his eyes unable to believe that they had sex that night. Lin Mo didn't avert his gaze either, and even started to already approach Ying Jun, as my older brother's cell phone rang sharply on the nightstand, ruining such an intimate moment. Ying Jun unhappily turned around and looked at the machine. But there was nothing to do, and he had to take the call. There was such a shout from the receiver that Ying Jun involuntarily moved the phone away from his ear. The only thing he realized was that he was in big trouble. He hung up the phone without even waiting for a reply, and Ying Jun could only stare at the phone in his hands in amazement. The guy realized it was time for him to run to work. so without wasting any time, he jumped out of bed briskly, and grabbing my brother's things on the way because his were dirty, ran toward the bathroom. However, just as he left, his phone rang again. Lin Mo took the device in his hands and looked at the display. He approached the bathroom and knocked on the door. After informing his brother that his phone was ringing again, Lin Mo asked his brother for permission to enter his bathroom. Through the sound of the water, he heard his brother's plea to just put the machine in his hand. Lin Mo was a little upset by such an answer, but he had nothing to object. Just then, Ying Jun stuck her hand out of the shower stall and started fumbling in the air with it, trying to fumble for her phone. Seeing this, Lin Mo was slightly surprised. Then he took and grabbed his older brother's hand tightly, after which he put a cell phone in his palm. Ying Jun wrenched his hand away from his grip. Lin Mo stood there for a few more seconds and looked at his palm where his brother's hand had just been. Then he clenched his palm tightly into a fist. The thought suddenly occurred to him that it was quite likely that Ying Jun hated him after last night. Before he could develop it properly, there was the sound of the bathroom door opening. His older brother jumped out of there, already dressed, and said goodbye to him as he walked. My brother began to quickly put on his shoes, then pulled his jacket over himself. All the while, his younger brother stood nearby watching him. When Ying Jun was about to leave the apartment, Lin Mo offered to drive him, as he didn't know the area. But Ying Jun threw on the go, without even turning around, that he would get there by cab. Then the door closed behind him with a slight click. Ying Jun found himself in the entranceway and almost ran towards the elevator. It wasn't until he was outside his brother's apartment that he exhaled with relief. Ying Jun leaned his shoulder against the wall, trying to comprehend everything that had happened the day before. He literally wanted to bang his head against the wall for acting so loose. Ying Jun really regretted drinking so much at that ill-fated party yesterday. Finally, the elevator car pulled up to his floor, and the kid was finally able to get away from the floor where his little brother lived. As the elevator took him downstairs, he pulled out his phone, determined to focus on work and put all the nonsense out of his head. Ying Jun opened a correspondence with his colleague, intending to jump right in. His attention was immediately drawn to the picture he had been sent, and he zoomed in. Ying Jun immediately recognized the guy he was in the club with in the photo. The guy realized he was in big trouble. Meanwhile, the medical university was also bustling with its own life. Passers-by walked leisurely along the sidewalk, mingling with the crowd of people and looking around and into their phone displays. Just then, a car whirled past them, raising a column of dust and blowing the wind around the passers-by. And then the car came to a stop with a loud squeal of brakes. Several security men came out of there and brought out a carpet. The security guards started laying out the carpet, and soon everything was ready near the car for the exit of apparently very important person. A male security guard opened the car door, and out of its bowels first appeared a foot in polished shoes. Then a certain guy started to leisurely make his way outside. He finally got out of his luxury car completely and looked down on the people around him. Everyone around looked at the guy with undisguised surprise and even admiration. Many people started discussing the appearance of such a famous person in their medical institution and marveled at it. And the guy walked the red carpet completely oblivious to the conversations behind him. His gaze was fixed only on where he was going. And the purpose of his visit to this institution was to visit the laboratory building. Lin Mo was standing in the same laboratory with his mask on, working on the body of a girl who had been admitted. His classmates looked at him from time to time and admired his stamina and composure. It turned out that the body Lin Mo was examining was the same girl who had been hit by a car in front of him. One of the female students covered her eyes with her hands in exhaustion, unable to look at the inspection of the body any longer. Lin Mo continued to work calmly and agreed that to someone unaccustomed to such things, it looked quite terrifying. The girls scurried away from the office because one of the students was not feeling well after all. Then the very cool guy who had recently driven up to the university with such glamour suddenly approached the office. After observing Lin Mo for a bit, the guy suddenly called out his name. Lin Mo turned around and looked at the stranger, and then he got distracted from his work. And the guy took off his glasses, intending to introduce himself. But Lin Mo interrupted him, as he knew very well who this stranger was. This really surprised the guy, and a bit even threw him off balance, shaking off a bit of his hubris. Lin Mo shrugged his shoulders, explaining that they had previously interacted. The stranger didn't believe him at first. However, Lin Mo, calmly taking off his medical gloves, called out his name, Min Kai-je, and the fact that he received his doctorate at the age of 20. Then the guy put the gloves on the table and continued the biography of the uninvited guest. He knew that the latter was the head of the Special Crimes Department and had come here because of one high-profile murder in a bar. Lin Mo mockingly looked at the guy's reaction. Min Kai had no choice but to agree with him. Lin Mo turned away and started pulling the medical mask off his face, then grinned at the guy, satisfied with the impression he had made. And Min Kai suspiciously examined Lin Mo from head to toe, trying to figure out in turn what he was. He squinted with irritation at the thought that he was going to have a hard time getting this unusual guy to talk. Min Kai really disliked it when he came across difficult shots. However, he didn't say it out loud. Instead, the guy slipped his hand into his jacket pocket, and taking out his ID card, he motioned for Lin Mo to follow him to the station to testify. Lin Mo put aside his glasses on the table where his gloves were already, and silently stalked towards the exit past Min Kai. Min Kai began to tuck his document back into his jacket pocket, as his gaze fell on the operating table. On this table lay the girl's body, which was fully prepared for autopsy. Min Kai couldn't contain such a sight and immediately threw up under his feet. Meanwhile, the police station was also bustling with activity. Police were watching video of the murder scene on a laptop at the bar, where both Lin brothers were at the time. Ying Jun was also involved and realized that his brother could be a suspect as many of his fingerprints were found on the floor tiles around the victim. As his subordinate explained to the guy, Lin Mo has to be supervised for at least 48 hours until forensics finds new evidence. The girl was actually very surprised by Ying Jun's inaction while his brother was in real danger. Ying Jun only sighed heavily at this. He had already racked his brains trying to find a way out of the situation, but he was at a disadvantage because he was a witness in the case. His colleague fervently assured him that she was sure he was not at fault. There was another problem, though, and they both knew it. Ying Jun was automatically removed from his position of leadership on this case. Ying Jun only now thought about it and decided to clarify with the girl what the upperclassmen wanted to do. It turned out that they decided to put a new leader in place to begin with. This news upset Ying Jun. He regretted once again that he had drunk so much that night. However, what he heard in the next moment almost knocked the ground out from under his feet. Ying Jun found out that Min Kai was going to take this matter into his own hands. The cop was incredibly pissed off by this, as he knew that this upstart was constantly trying to compete with him afterward as to who was the better investigator. The girl tried to reassure Ying Jun. After all, his colleagues were not going to betray and would be with him to the last. Ying Jun looked at her incredulously. It seemed to him that everyone around him was against him and lying right in his eyes. Then suddenly he groaned long and hard. After all, he realized that Lin Mo was currently on Min Kai's dobros. The policeman realized that he urgently needed to save his brother. Ying Jun jumped up from his chair, intending to run towards them and interfere with the interrogation. The policeman knew about the bad reputation that Min Kai had. He was so harsh that he could beat up a suspect during interrogation. But no sooner had he run away than a colleague suddenly called out to him loudly. She pointed to the hickey that was visible on his neck. Ying Jun stopped and looked at her confusedly, trying to rather cover his neck with the collar of his hoodie. As the girl immediately noticed that it was Lin Mo's hoodie that Lin Mo was wearing, she folded her arms on her chest and realized that Ying Jun had spent the night at his brother's place. And then the girl's imagination began to draw even indecent pictures, and she directly asked the guy about it. Ying Jun looked at her skeptically but remained silent, not quite sure what she meant. Then his co-worker started whispering in his ear that she meant if he had spent the night with his brother as lovers. Ying Jun's face turned red at this statement. Then he recoiled from the girl and wailed that this was utter nonsense. He began to fervently resent how she could even think such a thing. After all, they were each other's family. And then he demanded that his colleague dare not even talk to anyone about it. The girl only smiled, looking at his reaction, and then she laughed, for she must have been right in her guess. Ying Jun playfully slapped her on the top of her head and sent her off to work. After all, the report wouldn't prepare itself. After a while, he was already standing under the investigator's door and listening to what was going on behind it. But to his dismay, nothing could be heard from under the door. Ying Jun's imagination immediately began to paint scary pictures of Lin Mo's interrogation. The boy was horrified at such thoughts. So without thinking long, he started pounding his fist on the door, urging Min Kai to come out to him immediately. But no one opened the door, and the guy kept trying, pounding the door harder and harder, and then decided to run around and try to knock her out. Ying Jun had already even made his first attempt at breaking the door, but then the doorknob finally yielded under his onslaught. Ying Jun literally fell into the room. In doing so, it struck right into Lin Mo's chest. Ying Jun, when he realized who was in front of him, was ready to jump for joy. Lin Mo, on the other hand, was very surprised at this appearance of his brother. Ying Jun, meanwhile, was looking at him strangely. For a moment, the younger brother even seemed a little out of it. But the older brother pulled himself together rather quickly, and his expression became normal, not overly enthusiastic. He then started jumping around Lin Mo, trying to find out if that obnoxious Min Kai had done anything to him. This behavior of the policeman quite angry and even offended the investigator, as he did not consider himself crazy. Lin Mo only smiled looking at this spectacle and assured his elder brother that everything was fine. Min Kai, on the other hand, was still grumbling and seemed like he wasn't even going to calm down. And Lin Mo noticed that although the investigator was a little angry, but everything went quite well. Ying Jun listened to his brother and suddenly realized that he hadn't changed a bit. Similarly, as a child, Lin Mo had always remained silent even if someone had wronged him. Ying Jun then threw a frown in Min Kai's direction. After a moment's hesitation, he threw the folder he had been holding in his hands at him. The folder flew right there in his face, but Min Kai deftly intercepted her and caught her. Ying Jun explained that this folder contained the results of the investigation. It turned out that the victim's blood alcohol content exceeded 10 ppm, and the victim himself died at 23 o'clock, when he and his brother had already left the bar for half an hour. Min Kai frowned and remarked that a person could die even if they had 0.5 ppm of alcohol in their blood, so the time of death didn't matter much. But Ying Jun was not going to back down and demanded that his brother not be detained, as there was too little evidence of his guilt, and then walked over to Min Kai and poked his finger at him and threatened to retaliate if he did anything to his brother. Min Kai, without paying much attention to the threats, opened the folder and started reading. That's how he found out that Lin Mo's fingerprints were found on the tile shard, and so he falls under suspicion anyway. Ying Jun only grinned at this and noticed that the investigator was reading the report, holding it upside down. Min Kai flashed a glance and started to flip the folder to the correct side. Ying Jun turned around and was about to leave and take his brother with him. But suddenly Min Kai grabbed his hand and asked him to stop. Ying Jun looked at him interestedly, and the investigator asked him to speak privately. However, Ying Jun didn't really like this idea and demanded to tell him and his brother what the matter was right away. But Min Kai didn't want to do that and remarked that he had never lied before to Ying Jun. But the policeman had a slightly different take on it. Here, Lin Mo pulled his brother behind him, urging him not to listen to this upstart's ramblings. However, his brother didn't listen to him, and Lin Mo had to leave the room, leaving them alone. The guy sighed and stood up, leaning his back against the wall. He was already getting annoyed by Min Kai's appearance. Lin Mo was very much fine with that one disappearing somewhere for good. 10 minutes ago, Lin Mo sat with Min Kai at the table and looked over the case files. Moreover, Min Kai was watching the guy carefully, especially his facial expression when looking at the materials. And Lin Mo actually looked at the picture of the dead body for quite a long time. At the same time, not a single muscle on his face trembled. Min Kai didn't even hold back and quipped that this was the first time he had ever seen a person who was looking at a picture of a corpse with such pleasure. Lin Mo hummed. After all, he didn't see any reason to be sad after all. It wasn't him in the pictures, and that was already happiness. The investigator looked at him with disapproval, for he did not understand how it was possible to show no sympathy for the death of a man. And the guy only brushed it off, as he didn't feel the need to sympathize with anyone. To this, Min Kai remarked that people like him really couldn't feel pity for anyone. So the investigator decided to catch the guy by asking him how he felt when he committed the murder. Lin Mo didn't reply anything to this, but the investigator knew without him that the feelings inherent in murderers were coldness, superficial emotions, and poor self-control. Then Min Tsai showed the guy a statement from his biography, thanks to which he could not arrest him, where he was diagnosed with typical dissociative identity disorder combined with progressive schizophrenia. Lin Mo seemed completely unconcerned about any accusations. He was just adamant that it was obvious that he hadn't killed anyone. The investigator didn't believe him, because that's what all criminals always say. But Lin Mo firmly stood his ground, for there was no compelling reason to accuse him. But the fact that the investigator was biased towards him was something that he could admit. But he didn't understand why Min Kai was biased towards him. Min Kai, hearing this unhappily, looked the guy straight in the eyes. But it was as if Lin Mo continued to scoff and calmly sat with his hands folded at the table, and even began to speculate the reason for this attitude. He was sure that the investigators, after receiving the alarm last night, had arrived on the scene very quickly. And after examining everything, we naturally decided to look at the CCTV footage. Lin Mo smiled and looked at Min Kai with interest. And then looking him straight in the eye, I noticed that it was probably not for nothing that he had dressed up so smartly to meet him. This insolent statement so angered the investigator that he angrily crumpled the sheet of paper lying on the table in front of him, after which he zealously started trying to refute Lin Mo's assumption. The guy, however, still acted calm and composed in contrast, and caustically remarked that they must have seen on the cameras what he had been doing with his older brother the night he left the club. And Min Kai really then saw the brothers kissing. This sight made the young man incredibly angry, and now at the memory of it, he began to lose his temper. Min Kai jumped up and ominously hissed at Lin Mo right in his face to stay away from Ying Jun, but the guy was completely unafraid of him and calmly continued to sit in his seat. And then Min Kai decided to jab Lin Mo more painfully, reminding him that if it wasn't for his amnesia, the murderer of his brother's mother wouldn't be at large right now. He actually managed to wipe a little of that unwavering calmness off the guy's face. Lin Mo remarked that Min Kai shouldn't remind him of this. After all, it was his mother too. And then, as if mockingly asked if he really believed he had memory loss. He smiled slyly and hinted that he could remember things if he wanted to. This really surprised the investigator because he was sure the guy didn't remember anything. Lin Mo lazily replied that he really didn't remember anything. But Min Kai didn't seem to believe him and grabbed the guy by his shirt and shook him violently. Lin Mo noisily exhaled air from his lungs. And then, with a look of triumph, he said that as long as Ying Jun wanted to get information from him, it was better for him to be by his brother's side. There was silence in the room, and it seemed that the teeth that Min Kai was grinding with anger after such a statement were about to fall out. Unexpectedly, Lin Mo sighed sadly, remembering his emotions after seeing his mother dead. Then, as if waking up, he leaned towards Min Kai and remarked snidely that Ying Jun would not be surprised by showing off her body, even if it was beautiful and cheap accessories. Min Kai seemed to have completely not expected him to make such a statement, and Lin Mo continued to destroy him with words, saying that people like his brother could only be happy with those who were similar in character to him. Min Kai looked at him with anger, squinting his eyes, for the guy was hitting his most painful points. He knew exactly what Ying Jun could really be like in terms of character and behavior. Min Kai was very angry that Lin Mo had hit the very spot and anticipated all of his intentions. The investigator realized that after all this guy had been through, it would not be possible for him to remain carefree for all he wanted. Min Kai realized that he had somewhat underestimated and misunderstood Ying Jun's essence, and Lin Mo, as if hearing his thoughts, finally finished him off by saying that he would never be able to become close to Ying Jun. Min Kai became furious at such words. He wanted to immediately strangle this Lin Mo. The investigator was especially pissed off that the guy didn't appreciate the expensive Louis Monet watch, calling it cheap bling. Min Kai had gotten so comfortable with the memories of his conversation with Ying Jun's younger brother that he was somewhat surprised when the real guy beside him now asked him what he wanted from him. Min Kai realized that he needed to warn his older brother about how dangerous his younger brother could be, but he didn't understand how he could best do it. Then he leaned his hands on the table and began from afar. The investigator said that he had recently looked at Lin Mo's data for the past few years, thus finding out that the boy suddenly disappeared 5 years ago and his father never filed a missing son's report during that time. Suddenly, Ying Jun slammed the folder from where the investigator was reading the information with irritation. Min Kai looked at the guy in surprise, and Ying Jun said with annoyance that he already knew it all perfectly well. Min Kai took the folder in his hands again and stated that after Lin Mo disappeared, he had tried every way he could to learn at least something about him, but nothing worked. Wherever he went on the matter, there was silence everywhere. Until one day, Lin Mo showed up 2 years ago at the medical school where he entered with top grades. Since then, Min Kai had been watching the guy closely, and there was really something to see, for death seemed to be stalking Lin Mo. He was next to someone who decided to commit suicide. You witnessed the victim of a love tragedy. Ying Jun listened to the investigator carefully, but to his disappointment, he didn't believe him at all. Min Kai slammed the folder shut and looked at him regretfully. The guy wanted to shout that Ying Jun was in vain for not realizing completely obvious things, and his love for his brother was misleading him. Min Kai approached the guy and asked that since he didn't suspect his brother, then why keep him under investigation? Ying Jun looked at him confusedly. Then he thought hard about whether Min Kai was really so right. The boy wasn't at all sure he didn't suspect his little brother of anything, especially after what Min Tsai had told him about his background. Ying Jun realized that he had even more questions for his brother now, but he wasn't sure if he would ever get answers to them. Min Kai watched the guy's thrashing even with some sympathy, and then tried to hug Ying Jun, thus expressing support for him. But the guy irritatedly pushed his hands away without letting him near him and stating that Min Kai was completely not his type. Then the investigator finally decided to ask directly who Ying Jun's heart was occupied by and if it was occupied at all.